let's do this though. Let's just keep trucking with this conversation. Let's have a look at part of the chat last night. It was a good one, actually. It was a good show. Max Harris and Willie Jackson and two regulars were there as well. And they were talking a bit at the start about, actually Willie Jackson has a good crack at Damien Grant, takes him to task. There's a very interesting, I don't know if I've jotted this down. I don't know whether he says it in this thing, but one of the interesting points that was made is a lot of media now have truth behind paywalls and sensationalism in front. And I thought that's really fucking interesting. Yes. That is really interesting. If you look at the News Talk ZB commentary and stuff, I not News Talk ZB, sorry. I meant to say NZME and the Herald. I pay for the Herald for the premiere stuff. And I kind of go, oh, because that's the stuff that doesn't need the sensational headline because people are paying for it. You're not going to get anyone else clicking on it. And it's just a very, very interesting perspective. Anywho, let's get into this first clip. I'm just going to say Willie Jackson has a good crack, mate. It's pretty good, actually.
But it is exactly state coercion. If the state is saying we want to fund the media,
states always funded the media.
Then go and do it, right? No. If you want to take taxpayers' money to give it to the spin-off, then by all means do it and do it explicitly. But why?
Let me just say one thing before I let Willie come in on this. I mean, one way of
before I let Willie tear him a new one.
Thinking about this is these media networks are using an input which is local journalism, local research, local work that they're not paying for. And
while taking the advertising revenue as well.
This is something that you should support, Damien. This is just about putting a proper
rights.
price,
It's property
price
rights.
on an input. But
Willie, the government finally got around to agreeing to your digital bill, much to Damien's disgust, that will force the big tech czars to pay for the news content they are taking. Has the government timed this in the week News Hub goes under so they don't look completely useless?
I think it's a bit of that. No doubt about it. They've done absolutely nothing in the broadcasting and media area. We heard Melissa Lee, one of Damien's heroes.
Hold on, I object to that.
It was all a big shakedown, according to her.
Yep.
I mean, I don't know what planet you're on, Damien. All your life, the state has been funding media. All your life. 1ZB, somebody remind Mike Hoskins.
There you go.
He's the beneficiary of a state-funded channel. These guys talk like we never ever funded the media. ZB was set up on state funding. National Radio set up on state funding.
Awful.
But these guys talk, why are they doing it? We're doing it because New Zealanders believe in a public media.
Willie, I want to pull you up on that.
You can't pull me up because you do not know your history or you've forgotten it or you've got amnesia. There's something wrong with you, Damien. I don't know what's wrong with you. Let me finish. What a great day, you know. I was looking at the Damiens and all these crazy right wingers. They're so broken over it, you know, because Goldie's actually got a bit of decency, you know.
A little bit.
Not
much.
There's a bit of
just enough.
No, and a bit of common sense here.
Yes.
Because here's the thing, Damien. The industry don't care what you say. 95% of the industry want this because these mongrels have been stealing news and not paying for it. They make $1 billion, I think it's about $1 billion a year that's going out of the country.
Why should Facebook make money off you, Damien, not pay you?
$1 billion, Damien.
All right.
There you go. There's the first part there. Get him, Willie. Go get him. Why don't you get him, Willie? Have a crack. And obviously, I mean, you guys are aware of this, but they're talking about what we talked about last night, and Google and Facebook scraping information off other websites and putting it on their own thing and not paying it for it. So the reporter at News Talk ZB does the work, gets paid for the 7 hours of work, writes the article, you know, and then ZB puts it on their website, and then Google scrapes it, and then you never have to go to the ZB website, which means ZB has paid for everything to be done, and Google takes all the money from the advertising. So that's a part of what they're talking about. Joey, go for it, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the fact that Willie is just pointing out that for the majority of media in New Zealand, it has been a state-funded entity.
Yeah,
like the assets and the institutional knowledge all came out of NZBC. We all look back at like archives is full of state-owned content from the NZBC. Even when they were privatized and sold off, we're still getting the benefits of it.
Yeah.
And the reason that the state is involved in these entities is because they need and they benefit from the public being informed. And I don't think, like, we might all make jokes about, the lefty media, or the media has a bias towards the right. But we chop and change depending on whether we like the story. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
And that's how it should be. If these organizations have less reporters, then they're trying to do more things and they're spending less time chasing down a story. And it could be one that brings down a government, or the fact that these guys could be scared of being the centerpiece of a story that brings down a government keeps the fuckers honest. How many times has someone been caught by the media? Can we really afford to have less people doing good work? Like in the last couple of weeks, Paula Penfold's amazing story about Chinese interference in New Zealand political process. Do we not need that? Do we need our media organizations to resort to clickbait?
Yeah.
To keep
in front
the doors
of the paywall. Clickbait in front of the paywall, truth behind.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in a country as small as New Zealand, we just don't have the advertising base to support the amount of media that we are used to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Would Damien Grant be happy that there's one media outlet, they have a fucking monopoly, it's the only way that they can make money, but it's all one person's point of view?
Well, he wouldn't have a problem if it was the right person, and obviously he'd have a huge problem if it was the wrong person. This actual conversation goes straight into that. Like, this is you've introduced, without knowing it, the next part of the conversation, which goes along the lines of, why don't people just pay for it? So let's just jump into that part of the conversation. It's only a minute, just over a minute. We'll have a listen to what they've got to say.
So let's just pull that apart. My first question is, if New Zealanders believe in this sort of journalism, why won't they pay for it?
What do you mean?
Mm.
If people valued this sort of journalism,
this is coming back to what I just said in that last interview. It's like, and this, I'm not trying to preempt the conversation, but he can only see value in things that have a financial worth. That's all he sees value in.
Why? Let Willie answer the question. If people value it, why aren't more people subscribing to ZB Plus and NZME?
Well, they have their subscribers, but New Zealanders believe, I believe a fair amount, a great majority of New Zealanders, probably in the older bracket, 35, 40 plus, they believe in strong public media. And they also believe in a free, it's not all about pay. People want to access things, because as of right, they've been taxpayers all their lives. They should be able to access free things.
If I could just jump in, there's plenty of things that New Zealanders value that we don't pay for. Like we use parks, we use the environment, and the problem with your way of seeing the world is it doesn't value something that doesn't have a price on it.
It's all commercial and dollars for you, Damien. You're a sad man. I'm worried about you.
That's sweet, Willie, and a little bit concerning. But let's talk about.
So it's a really interesting point. I'd never heard it before. Max said that, and we saw you, Frosty, in there. Just be aware, we saw it.
Great comment.
It was, and I know it's a bit of a tangent to say parks and the environment and stuff, but it's true. It seems to be. What we're finding at the moment from a sector of society is, if I can't put a dollar sign in front of it, it has no value. And I would also say, when Damien Grant goes, why won't they pay for it? And I'll tell you the answer to that, Joey, and it's that we can't afford to. A part of this conversation, and I don't know if it's still on the one clip I've got to come or if I cut it out, Willie Jackson makes a very good point about the size of the country versus the denseness of the population. What we have to do to cover the breadth and width of the country, like, for example, being able to report from those areas, can never be sustainable, because we don't have the population base to pay for it. It's as simple as that. That's why we need a public broadcaster. And that's why in the announcement made by the government over the weekend, yesterday, which I will still applaud, is them saying that local TV channels are going to be able to get access to the funding that's till this point has only been available to movie companies. Great. Because the way we have New Zealand content, and I've told you the story before, probably, Joey. When I was working overnights on ZB, smallest, most, ugliest bloody on the totem pole down the bottom, carrying everyone's shit. Per capita, I had a bigger audience than Bill O'Reilly, who was the number one host in cable news. So per capita, so we had more. So I had more people per 1,000 than he had listening to me. That means I had about 100,000 people and he had 3 million. And actually, those numbers may not be quite right, but whatever they were. But what it meant was because the population size wasn't big enough, even though I had more listeners per 100,000 than he had viewers per 100,000, it actually worked out that that there was no money to be made off that. That was just a service that the radio stations provided to keep their talkback going overnight and going live. We don't have the population to support massive amounts of media. We just don't. So why won't they pay for it? And the answer is simple, because New Zealand can't afford to pay for it. Then we come back to what you just said, Chewy. Do we therefore just have one public broadcaster with one voice? Or does the government go, we need a mix of voices. We need variety. In our small country, we need some of the smaller groups within that country represented in media. So we will provide an aspect of funding that people can apply for. So it's as simple as that. Your whatever minority group has got now a show on public access or on a local radio station or starting up something that may require funding because they don't have the wherefore or they don't have the audience to reach. And I continually say that just because something doesn't necessarily turn a profit doesn't mean it's not valuable, doesn't mean it should not be heard in this country, right? Whether it's a disability program on TWG on Sunday morning, whether it's an Asian radio show on local radio somewhere in the country, whether it's Māori radio, just because it won't turn a commercial return doesn't mean we don't need that representation. We don't need to hear their stories and their voices. We do need to hear them. We're a multicultural country. That's why we provide public funding for some of these things, Joey.
There's a reason over the last couple of years that have absolutely sung the praises of Māori TV around their Anzac Day coverage.
Yeah.
As someone that has been so immersed in World War II history for over half his life, they're the only ones telling me new stories.
Yeah.
They're the only ones telling me things that I haven't heard before about Anzac Day and World War II and the people that went away to fight for this country. And that keeps bringing me back to Māori TV isn't profitable. TV as a whole isn't profitable. It's enormously expensive. But these guys are great at counting the cost, but not knowing the value.
Yeah, very good.
And as much as I can be disparaging as fuck about Shortland Street, but how many people involved in our film and television industry, of which we're enormously proud, got their start on Shortland Street or paid their bills and were able to continue practicing their craft on something like Shortland Street. I know many comedians. You can't be a comedian. You can't be an entertainer and pay all your bills. So along comes something like 7 Days.
Yep.
That has a writing room full of comedians and has comedians as hosts and that sort of thing. And that keeps that industry ticking over. And then you look at how many New Zealand bands got New Zealand on air funding. Someone like Damien Grant would go, oh, well, bands should be able to stand on their own 2 feet. They should be able to exist on whatever they make by playing down at the pub. Or he somehow thinks that bands can tour in this country and make money. It is a fallacy. And at that point, you need to go and say, okay, arts and culture in this country. Is it just a commercial operation? No.
Yeah.
It is not, but it has a value far in excess of its door sales.
Yeah.
And we're enormously proud. We're super proud when something like Whale Rider blows up, or Flight of the Conchords is selling out arenas. Now remember, we shat on Flight of the Conchords to the point where they went overseas.
Yeah,
we didn't want that program. There wasn't the funding for it. You know, it's mental. We're happy when a New Zealand product breaks overseas. We don't want to help them do it. Damien Grant thinks that they don't need any help. It's bullshit. It's survivor's bias.
You're talking about not being able to, a band can't tour. I agree with you, but I just go like this. Like for every 660, there is 10,000 bands that can't make it. For every Lord, there's literally 5 million, because she's the only one to do what she's done, that can't make it. And as you were talking, Chewie, I just stopped and thought, imagine the world that Damien Grant is advocating for. Close your eyes and imagine if the only media we saw, heard, and read had to wash its face financially, what would there be? And the answer is there wouldn't be very many minority stories told. There wouldn't be, and that's not, when I say minority, and I constantly remind people of this, I'm not talking about ethnicity, disability, minority. If you are in a small sector of the country, the retired people, although they may be a majority in the future, but just imagine that world though. What would it sound like? It's a bleak thought. I mean, he mentions places like, the business, NBR, is it right? NBR, the business thing, being out, and because it's business and they have a niche audience and they're able to do it. Great. That's the model. Imagine what else there'd be. I just think it's shocking to think of what it could be.
Whenever someone like Damien Grant tries to imagine a world, it's terrifying to me. I think his vision of the world is just every second building is a Wilson's car park, just slab, tilt slab, multi-layered car parks that are monetized to the hilt and run by a predatory company, is his waking wet dream. And we'd all be reading a Murdoch run, like the one website that we can access is a Rupert Murdoch run website, as we have our lunch in a Wilson's car park.
Yeah. Yep.
And the Wilson's car park doesn't, it just has stairs because there's no people in wheelchairs in Damien Grant's world.
I just feel like we've said Damien Grant's name so many times now. If we say it one more time, he may appear. So maybe we'll try and avoid that. And we'll go to the last clip, which is just a minute. And it's basically, the question is getting asked, is Winston's big lie, right? And that's about, the Public Interest Journalism Fund. Is that the main reason why people distrust the media today? That's the question that's about to be asked.
Follow-up question, Willie. Willie. Winston's big lie is that the Public Journalism Fund was a giant bribe and that the entire media were bribed, when really he's referring to a New Zealand on-air funding note that set out their expectations of what applying for Māori media funding was. That funding note was quickly clarified by New Zealand on air that it wasn't an editorial declaration. How much blame should Winston take for plummeting trust in New Zealand media when he's purposely deceitful with his bribe claim?
Yes, no, he should take a lot of blame. And look, let's be clear about this. We've probably had overzealous officials in terms of NZ
But it was
on
a
air.
funding note. It was a funding note that was quickly clarified.
I've talked to Mark. What's Mark's name? Jennings.
Yep.
About it. He said they had to talk about. There was the request about the treaty.
Yep.
They just put so it was no big deal, but they were just wanting to go down that track. It was not a final and absolute.
No, it wasn't an editorial decision, was it?
Yeah, but the right
have conflated it to some great big bribery.
Damien's brought his son in here, he's a good little man, but I don't know if I like that, Damien. Now I might not go so hard on you if you brought him into. Hey, what's the story here, Damien?
It's another story. Don't worry, it's coming
that comes up later on. So there you go. It was just an interesting point to go, because the distrust in the media has dropped and dropped and dropped and dropped and dropped, and you definitely saw a shift in society for all sorts of distrust reasons. Sort of COVID onwards. That was at its highest point probably at the protest, and that has changed things. Whereas, as was said there, and as we've said before, media's always been funded. They called it the Public Interest Journalism Fund at that point, but there's always been funding from New Zealand On Air for special projects, radio and television. And Winston has he has to take a fair amount of the blame for it. Chewy?
Yeah. I find that funny, terrifying. We never really saw the type of criticism that the media got up until COVID. And I think that's been massively amplified by people that want to take advantage of it.
And Trump started it. Look at those guys in the back row. The dishonest, fake news. Fake news is what started it. Really did.
News. This is another reason we've got to stop Trump, because that man has done damage to the political discourse of the entire planet. In my view, you are fake news. Okay, you're fake news. Yeah. I mean, look, there was some potentially valid criticism about what Labour were doing about merging Radio New Zealand and TWG. But my God, what it could have been.
I don't actually really agree. I don't think there was a lot of criticism that were fair. I think it was, if they had turned it into the BBC, it would have gone for the next 100 years, no problems at all. Yes, there would have been some cutbacks and stuff. I guess the only criticisms would have been some people would have lost their jobs because you didn't need to have two newsrooms in Auckland. You could have merged it, and you could have had a cheaper newsroom with 50% more people.
Yeah, just some of the content. Well, a lot of the content that Radio New Zealand puts out, I would say, as someone that at this moment in time very rarely watches broadcast TV, Radio New Zealand on a TV would be something that I would be interested in.
Yeah.
But we're not going to get that, because that was spun out of this whole thing of the government trying to control all the media. No, they were trying to keep the media fucking alive.